that tonight at 6:30, I'll do a Zoom session for that last REPL. So we'll do it together. The REPL that is the taco class. It's a really important REPL for you to get through. It shouldn't take very long on that Zoom session. If you connect to the Zoom session and get that REPL turned in, I'll give you just a small late deduction. If you watch the REPL later and get it turned in, it'll be a little bit more of a deduction, but it's still important enough that I want you to get it done. Would rather give you a late deduction than not have you do it. The people that forged ahead and didn't worry about the weird codes, of course, great job, because that's what we have to do sometimes as programmers, is forge ahead and not worry about the weird codes. Sometimes stuff like that gets us. So since it was messing with you guys, we'll get together and try that. 6:30 tonight if you can. You'll just be able to connect to that same regular Zoom session. So anyways, we'll still be using classes and looping structures and if statements and all those other things we've learned in Windows Forms. We're just kind of giving it a nicer interface, a nicer front end to work with the user. So with our console apps, where we used our write and write line, excuse me, to display data and our read line to gather data, this will just be a little bit different. We'll use our event handlers associated with our different button events to control things. So let's try one. Whenever we're working with Windows Forms, we're working with a graphical user interface, of course, GUI, and we'll be looking at the system.windows.forms namespace. So we'll be adding and using clause for that if our application doesn't already have it. But we'll select Windows Forms when we start up, so it should already have it. I don't know, it's like there's something in here that I'm allergic to. Somebody bring in any sort of beef. You guys were looking around at beef before you came in. Allergic to something here. Thank you for asking though, Edward. Hopefully it will go away. Make it a fun Zoom session to watch if I'm hacking and choking. Of course, they're so fun anyways. I know. All right, I'm gonna open up an instance of Visual Studio here. And don't create a project yet, because we've got to look at using this new template for a forms-based project. So I do want to create a new project. Now, when I get to the template screen, I want to find, make sure I'm on Visual C#, and then in the middle, we want to find the Windows Forms app .NET framework. Now, there are thousands and millions, and I don't know if there's billions, but there's lots of Windows Forms apps out there in the world. So it's a great tool to have in your tool belt. Let's name it something good. Chapter 9 for, oh, you know what, I want to name it first form. That'll work. Now, in our first form, we just want to do a little bit of experimenting. First of all, when we create this kind of application, Visual Studio creates a default application for us that's a little bit different than what we've been used to looking at. So when the application opens for the first time, we'll see our form in design view. So this is the interface design that we're creating for our users to experience. So we are seeing something that we can create in a WYSIWYG fashion. What you see is what you get. So whatever we put on this form is the same as what our user will see, basically. So if you look at your Solution Explorer, you'll see we have a little bit different of things, not much. Our program.cs file is still going to control kicking off our application. Let's take a look at it. It's a little bit different now, and it's been generated by Visual Studio for us. So in general, we shouldn't have to change it. So our program.cs file now just says that it wants to do some application setup, enabling these styles, set our text rendering defaults, and then it says, go ahead and run this form 1. Well, here's form 1. That's the form that we were looking at when we first came up in design mode. So we could run this application right now. Let's run it. Click Start. And you'd see the Windows form pop up. So it's going to have the default form name. Look, you can really notice it with that wild background back there. So the default form name is the title for the title bar. If I look at my Windows form, by default, it has a minimize button. Notice what icon is in your toolbar for your running application. It should be the same as your console app. Has a maximize button, and it has a close button. And notice that those things all work. They're all fully implemented without you doing any code for them. So I want to go back and do some more with that form. If I go to Solution Explorer, I can double click on form1.cs, and that'll open up that form in design mode for me again. Now, if you expand that form1.cs in your Solution Explorer, you'll see that it's made up of a couple of different components. It has the form designer, and then as we keep going, it has this form1 object. That's what that yellow icon is. And underneath the form object, it has some properties and methods, and we'll be adding more. So as we add things to our form, this will get bigger. We'll have more stuff. So how do we add stuff? Well, we use the toolbox. My toolbox is on a tab over here. It's been auto-hiding, so I can click on that to expand it. If your toolbox isn't hiding in a tab over there, you can go to the View menu and find Toolbox. See if I can find it. It's probably under other windows because it's just, do you see it? Where is it? Yeah. Okay, you've got it, good. So it should always be there. Now my toolbox, since I'm going to do some design here, I'm going to go ahead and pin it just for while I'm working because I don't want it to auto hide every time I'm working on things. And I've got some different categories here in my toolbox. All of these are controls that I can add to my form. So the top category, all Windows forms, is going to have all of these controls. Underneath that, the different categories are going to have the kind of tools that they mentioned. So a lot of times we can just use these common controls. Let's expand that and we'll see what they're talking about. Click on your form. And you might have to click on your toolbox again because it seems to sort of build it that first time. Did it come back? Yeah, it's kind of weird and slow that first time. Is everybody showing some stuff now?
Yeah, you have to click on the form one, but yes.
Yeah, and sometimes, even when you're developing, you won't be able to find your tools, and it's because you clicked on someplace else and you're not actually on your form. So it's very context sensitive. Wherever your cursor is, what you have selected is what Visual Studio is going to be showing you. And that'll become a lot more obvious now that we're working on this graphical stuff than it was with the console. Now, here are some common controls that I have. I want to start with a button. Let's put a button on our form. Now, you have some options here. You can just double click on that button tool, and if you do, it'll pop that button up in the top left corner of your form. I don't want it there, so I could move it, but first I'm going to delete it. So just press the delete key with that item selected to delete it. Practice that. And then this time I'm going to click on my button control and move my mouse pointer over and draw my button. So that's an option too. So whichever way you like. Now, when I draw my button, I can kind of put it where I want on my form. But if it's not exactly where I like, I could move it. So just like all of the other Windows controls, you can move things by clicking and dragging when you have the 4 arrowhead mouse pointer, as long as your control is selected. All of the resizing handles work the same as they do in Word or whatever because you're working in a Microsoft product. So everything should be very similar along those lines. Now I can do all of this graphical stuff here as far as getting my button set up, but I can also change properties in the properties window. So again, my properties window is down below my Solution Explorer. If yours isn't here, or you're not finding it, you might want to do that window, set windows to default, just so that you can find these things while we start working with all of these visual tools, and then you can get used to them and move things around the way you like it. But if I went back and said reset window layout, then my window layout would be just the same as this up here, because I always use the default so that you guys can figure out where I am. Now, when I look at this properties window, some things about it. First of all, it has properties in its little title bar. I could grab it by its little title bar and drag it out of this docked state if I wanted it to. If I had a 4-monitor setup like I should, I would be able to move my properties window over to another monitor. That's where I would want it, so that I could be working on that step separately. Now, under the properties title bar then, we have the control we're currently working on. That name is listed right there, and right now I'm working on button 1. That's my current control. Underneath that, there's a properties window toolbar. So right now, I have my items sorted A to Z. Yours are probably sorted by category. You can leave them sorted by category if you'd like, but it can get really hard to find the properties that you want. If you have them sorted A to Z, alphabetically, then you can just go find the property that you're looking for. So totally up to you, but I usually keep mine sorted alphabetically for you guys. Now, the next thing over the next icon is the properties itself, and that's what we're looking at. Here in a minute, we'll look at the lightning bolt events that's the opposite of that properties icon. And then lastly, the key icon, we won't get into that too much. It's kind of advanced stuff, but that's all right. So what are properties? Just like properties in our C# programs, these are ways that we are allowed to set and get information about these class components that we're adding to our Windows forms. So as a button, I offer up properties to you. The properties of a button could be all sorts of different things. The first one I want you to find is the name property. Now, since I have things sorted alphabetically, I am starting with A. If you're by content category, yours will be sorted a little different. No matter what, the name will be up at the top because the name is in parentheses. Yes, sir?
It's only showing me properties for my form.
Click on your button.
It made a new button.
Where's your other button? Drag it.
Weird. Okay.
It didn't switch automatically. Look, mine switched. What Edwards was doing is like it was stuck on making buttons. So if he clicked on something, it just created a new button. So he had to click up here on the pointer to get it back to a pointer control to move around. I noticed mine switched back automatically. That's a new thing with this version of Visual Studio. With the older versions, it just would always deselect what you were on automatically. So watch that if it keeps creating things for you. Now we want to change the name of this button. So I'm going to double click in the name property and I'm going to change the name to BTN Hello. Now with our controls on a form, normally we name the controls with a 3-letter prefix that kind of tells other people what kind of control this is. It's a button, so the 3-letter prefix is BTN. And I'll name it Hello. Now, the other controls that I can look at for my button that we want to really pay attention to right at this moment is the text property. Let's go find it. The text property is what displays on your button. And right now mine says button 1. And I don't like that. I want it to say something more interactive. Let's say, click me. Now, if that doesn't look the way you like it, You could try some other properties. But let's put a little code in here first, and then we'll come back and see if we can make it look a little bit different. So are you ready? Did you find that text property and get it to say something good? Yes, sir?
So if you deleted your button toolbox, how would you get it back?
Well, I don't think you could delete your button from your toolbox. You should be able to, maybe you're in a different category where you're not seeing the button control.
Common control should be the first pointer, right?
Do what?
It should be under common control of the toolbox under the pointer.
Yeah, you would have to use the desktop computer then if you did that, because now would not be a time for us to fix that problem. So if you did that, then you need to get on that desktop computer. Don't be wasting your time trying to figure out what happened. Come along with us, and we will figure that out later. That's a problem for not right now. Okay, so in our form, what we want to do is add some code. When we were looking at those examples, I mentioned our Windows forms are going to be event-driven. We want our code to execute when an event occurs. We want to run code when somebody clicks that button. So to associate our code with an event, it's really easy. We can just double-click on the event, our button, double-click, and it'll open up the code window. Now, when I'm looking at, come on, zoom in. Sometimes it doesn't want to zoom in, like now. Okay, we'll look at it really small. When we open the code window, we'll see that our event procedure method name looks just like any other method name. It says that this method is named button hello underscore click. So Visual Studio gives it a nice name for us based on what we've done so far. We named this button BTN hello, so that's what it named the first part of our method. And we want it to happen, we want this code to run when somebody clicks that button. So that's why it named it underscore click. Now we're going to get a couple of parameters from the operating system. The event occurrence will be contained within a variable E. And we don't need to worry about that too much. Every once in a while we can look at those events like to see if somebody clicked a certain key or something like that. But in general, the system's going to take care of those things for us. So what do we want to have happen when somebody clicks hello? How about a message box? Remember that one day we did do one message box. We saw that message box only had one method, show. And let's make it say something like, hello. Now it wants to zoom in. I was just doing it too quickly. Now, some other things about our code here. Notice that I don't have a regular class statement. It's a partial class. And that's because whenever we do a Windows form, Visual Studio is hiding some of the complexities from us behind the scenes in part of our class. And then we are putting our code in the other part. So our Form 1 class is split. Each of them are partial classes. And the system will put those two together to make the full class. And we'll look at that code that Windows is generating for us here in a second. But let's try our application. Does it work? I'm going to run it. Click my button, and there's my message box. Yay! Everybody's working okay? Okay, so let's make it a little prettier. We'll come back and do some other stuff with our code. Now, how would I get back to my form design so that I could fix up my form a little bit more? Yes, sir?
Put on the form1.cs9.
That would work. How about if my form1.cs design tab was closed, then how would I get to my form to work on it? Go to my Solution Explorer. Yep, double click it. Perfect. Now, sometimes when you open a form-based project, it'll just be empty. You know how that's happened to you since you've been using TFS, right? You open the solution and you're not seeing anything in your development environment. You have to go to your Solution Explorer and find your code. Sometimes these forms applications will open that same way. Don't worry, your stuff isn't all gone. You just have to find your Solution Explorer and double click to open your form. Yes, sir?
I can't open the designer again.
So go to this.
Oh, there you go. Thank you.
All right, so let's make it prettier. First of all, I'm going to click on my form itself, and in my properties window then, I'm looking at Form 1. I'd like to change the title because Form 1 is not very friendly. So that's our text property. So I'm going to change the text property to say like Hello World. Be our Hello World graphical application. Now, some other things that we might want to change with our form. What about the background color? This color is kind of, yeah, let's go change some. I'm going to scroll up because, again, I have mine listed alphabetically. Notice I'm not going to really worry too much about changing the name of my form. We'll do that more in C#2, but changing the form name can be a little bit of a mess. So we'll kind of leave that alone for now. But I do want to go and find my back color. Now the back color property is an option that gives us lots of choices. If you click on the drop-down tab, you'll see that it starts out with these system colors that are pretty bland, depending on what theme you're using. But then you can click on this tab to go to web colors. That'll give you more choices. Or you could do custom, and then you could do your own combining or whatever. But I'm just going to go to web, I think, and I'll make my back color. Let's see, I think I want to do something. I'll do dark goldenrod today. Now, some other things that I could change. Since I changed my back color, I think I want to change the color of my text. Sometimes we find that in our font property, but not in our Visual Studio Form Designer. We need to look at our for color property to change the color of our text. So I'll go to web. I'm going to find something that's just like, I don't know, darker than that. I'll use saddle brown. Now let's look at our font after we change that for color. Notice that the font property has a plus sign, that it's expandable. So it's a group property. When I look at this group property, I can expand it in the properties window and see all of those different options. Or I can click the ellipsis, the 3 dots, and bring up the font dialog control box, like I would see using Word or something. So when you change a font on your form, you're saying that any property that I add, any control that I add to this form, from now on should use this font. So your form is kind of the default. So you want to take your form, get everything set up the way you'd like it. That button that I'd already added won't be affected by these, but anything else that I add will. So I'm going to change it to something really noticeable so that we can really see that it's using our new font. I'll make it Broadway. That's noticeable. Now again, you can change your font size. We'll usually come in when we start something and change things a little bit just so we get used to it. Oh, look, it did change the button that I already had on there. Made a liar out of me. That's a new feature. That's interesting. So now my form controls are really changing everything else. I'm going to run it again. I think my click me text needs to be bigger. Try that. It's a little small. So I'll go to my button and look at the properties again of my button. And I can change the font on my button. I'll make it like 14-point font. Maybe even bigger. Now, some other properties that are important for us to look at. I'm looking at my button right now. Our colors are really helpful in making a nice visually appealing form. Remember, these things aren't going to be as glorious as your websites, but you don't want them to be like super boring, ugly, just gray, solid all the time either. So somewhere in between would be good. Now, some of the properties that we have, we won't worry too much about because we only want to look at the ones that are important to us as we go so that there's not an overabundance of things for you to learn. But some other things that you might like changing, you could mess with a little bit. The flat style, you can make things pop up a little bit. So if I change my flat style to like a pop-up on my button, you'll see that it changes the way it looks a little bit. It's style. Some other things we could do, we could actually add an image to this button. I don't want to add one to our button. We'll add one to our form here in a minute. But we could put an image on there or an image list if we wanted to have some sort of rotation. But I wanted you to notice the location property. The location is giving us X and Y coordinates of where this button's X, Y, upper left corner is located. So I'm going to take my button and I'm going to move it way up over here to this corner. And whoops, I got it kind of off the form. But I just want you to notice that our upper left corner is position 0, 0. So different systems, different GUI systems have that XY graph differently. For us, for our Windows forms, it's that top left corner is 0, 0. Now, when we're looking at this location and the size, if you scroll down, your size property is the same way where we have a width and a height. Both of those are talking about like a point. And a point is just a unit of measurement that's only relative to what we're currently working with. So we might have to do some experimenting with things to determine how many points we want to move something or we want to update something. So that's just for your information. So let's try messing with it a little bit. I want to go back to our code. So the easiest way to find it is just double click on our button again. And it takes me right back to that code that we were working on where we have our message box and we were showing the hello message. After somebody clicks our button, let's change our button's text. Right now it says click me. Let's make it say thank you after they click it. So in my event procedure for my button click event, I'm going to first show that message box that says hello. When I click OK on that, we'll be changing the text property of our button to say thank you. Let's run it. Now our button is still clickable, so we could do the same thing over and over. It would just keep changing it back to thank you again. Does yours work? Did okay? Okay, good. Now I want to stop running. And let's move our button. So our text property is very important. The text property is what displays on the button. And as you work with Windows Forms, you'll find that to be true about most of our controls, that we want to do the text property. Now, notice how we changed that property's value. Just the same way we changed a property's value for our audio CD or any class that we created. So here's our class name, BTN Hello. That's what we named our button that we put on our form. And really any instance of a control that we put on a form is an instance of class. And then we said, for the button hello class instance, I want to update the text property. So that's why it's button hello.text. And I want to set that property equal to the string that says thank you. Now I'd like to update some more things in our button. Let's change the left position by adding a couple 100 points to it. So sometimes we can update properties directly, like the X coordinate and the Y coordinate. A little tougher. Sometimes we can't. So let's run this now. Now we're saying, say hello with the message box. Thank them with the text on the button, and then move the button around. Okay, so we got some stuff working there. Now, one thing that's always fun for beginning programmers to try is you could create an application where when somebody moves the mouse over the button jumps around. Have you ever seen any of those old annoying kind of things? And those are really good practice for you because you can practice controlling all of that stuff. Where do you want to put it? Are you going to put it in a random position? All those kinds of things. So that's great. Good way to do it. All right, now that we have some things on our form, we should be able to see more in that Windows generated form code. We've got lots of stuff. In your Solution Explorer, look at your form1.cs file, and it should have more under the form1designer.cs now. Now you should see that your button is an object that's listed on form 1, and your button hello click event. I was backwards there. Bless you. Let's take a look at that .cs file, form1.designer.cs. This Windows form code has some stuff that's hidden, so I'll expand that. Come on, there it goes. So if we look at this class, Form 1, this is the part that Windows has generated for us that we haven't had to worry about. But there could be some interesting things in here that we like. So basically, they've created a method called initialize components. If you remember, your program.cs file runs that method now before it displays the form. So initialize components sets up our buttons, sets some basic properties to our button. Let's see, like I chose that Broadway font, got our button name, says click me. So we could do all this code ourselves if we wanted to, but using the form designer just helps us because it generates that code for us. But if we wanted to, we could copy it and generate a bunch more buttons or do anything that we wanted to. So all of this Windows system generated code is nothing to be scared of, but it's not really something that we need to change very often. So we'll change it with caution, but it's out there and we certainly can. Okay, so I'm going to close that Form 1 Designer code out. You can sure look at it anytime. Let's do a couple of other things on our form before I give you some time to experiment with it. I'm going to put my click me down here, and I want to find an image. So I'm just going to go to my Google, DuckDuckGo, whatever you like, and I'm going to find a Hello World image. And of course, you know there are many, many millions of them because all programmers in the world are always doing Hello World applications. Let's see. My form is kind of an ugly color, so I'm going to find something that sort of goes with it. Now, when I find the image that I want, I need to save it to my file system. So you know with some applications, you can just copy and paste them directly from the web. We can't do that with Visual Studio very well. It won't work too good for us. So I want to find the image that I want, and then I want to save that to my machine. So on this one, I'm just going to right-click and save image as. You can save it to your pictures folder, wherever you like, just so you can find it. Even your downloads folder, because we don't need to save it in the folder for a long time. but we do need it saved to our file system for us to copy into Visual Studio. Now I'm going to give it a better name, call it Hello World. And mine's just going into my downloads folder. Now I'd like to put that image on my form, and like I said, I can't just really like copy and paste it. What I've got to do is put a container on my form to hold it. So in my common controls, I'm going to see if I see anything. Oh, there it is, the picture box control. So I'm going to put a picture box control on my form. I'm going to make it kind of the size that I would like. I'm not going to worry too much about making it the same size as my picture. I'm going to make it the size that I sort of want it to be on my form. Now with the picture box control, we have this shortcut tool that's available to bring up really commonly changed properties. So if you click that little arrow, you'll see a couple of properties that we change often when we're working with picture box controls. Now those properties are still over here in our properties window. That drop down is just like a convenient place for them. So the one I want to find is choose image. Now if I were looking at my properties, I would find my image property, and on the image property, I would click the three ellipse or the ellipsis, and that would bring me to the find image dialog box in the same way. Anytime you import an image or anything into your Windows project, you want to make it part of your project's properties. And that means that when it's saved and your project runs, the project will be able to find it. If I imported a local resource like from my C drive, and then I sent this project, Edward took it home and he was trying to run it, if he didn't have that same object on his C drive in the same exact place, it would crash, right? We don't want that. We want this object, this image, to be available as part of the resources for this project. So I'm going to click import, and I'm going to go find it. And when I find it, I should see it displaying here. I'm ready to click OK. It's been imported into my project. Now it's not really displaying very well in that little window area that I gave it. So I can try some different display options. If I click, again, I can change my size mode. Right now, it's normal, obviously not fitting very well. Try the different options. You'll see they kind of mirror like our desktop wallpaper options. If I do stretch image, which to me just doesn't sound right, it'll shrink it too to that little teeny box that I gave it. So it'll make it the right size. If I do auto size, it makes my picture box all jankety. So that one I don't like because I already wanted it that other size.
Zoom works.
Zoom works. Center image doesn't usually. It's like people's social media pages. No, so Zoom is a little different, isn't it? So what's the difference between Zoom and stretch image? Yes, sir?
Zoom just fits the window size. So like, it just zooms out very much so you can see the whole thing.
How come I have borders with Zoom? Does stretch image on mine look stretched? So Zoom is going to give you a better result, isn't it? Because it's going to keep the aspect ratio of your picture. Yeah. So it might not take up the whole space as well as the auto stretch, but it'll keep that aspect ratio and make it not look as stretchety. All right, so for my picture then, if I run my application now, it should be showing up. I'm going to click me. Okay, it's fine. And my button is still moving out of the way. I'm going to have to change that. I don't like it anymore. Now, one thing that's kind of neat, if you imported in an animation or anything, it should work when you're running your form. It will display. Well, that's all fine and good, but I think I want my image to only show up after the user clicks my button. So I want to take my image and I want to make it to where when the application first starts up, you can't see it. So I'm going to click on my picture box control, and in my properties, I'm going to find the visible property. Right now, my visible property is true. I can see this picture. I'm going to change it to false. Now when I run my application, I won't see my picture. How could I make it where my picture shows up when somebody clicks that button? So I want to update my event procedure. And I want my, oh, we need to name that picture box, don't we? One thing, if I'm going to be going back and forth a lot between my code and my form, you know, you can right click on a tab and choose new vertical tab group and get those things side by side. Now remember, I had this person just like have a mental breakdown from this in the intro to programming class, so don't do it if it's too much for you to just look at one thing. Okay, so what do I want to do? I want to name my picture box control because I can't just have it out here not having a name at all. Picture box 1, that's a terrible name. So I'm going to change my name to be Pick Hello World. And then in my code, I can update something that's named properly. So I can say pick hello world dot visible equals true. And now when we run it, and if you don't want to move your button out of the way, you could comment that out. But I'll go ahead and run it. Now I'm going to do my click me button. There's my hello message, and then my picture shows up. Yay! Everybody's working okay? Let's add a label. Now, on my form, I have a button and I have this picture box. I'm going to put a label under my picture. So I'm going to find the label control and put it here under my picture. Label controls are kind of weird in Visual Studio. They will only be as big as the text that needs to fit in them. That can make it kind of hard for us when we're designing. So sometimes developers will put a long like nonsense statement, like one of those website filler things, in a label to make it the right size, because Windows will automatically auto size it at runtime. So for my label, I think I'll just make it say, hello to you. And this label, I need it to be a little bit bigger because this crazy font I picked, you can't even see it with that small size. So I'm going to find my font. And I think I'll go to at least like 14 or something. A little better, still not a very readable font. Now the next thing that I want to do with my label is I don't want to see it until I see my picture box. So I'm going to change its visible property to false also. Now with my label, we can choose to name items or not name them. Since we're going to change the visibility in our code of this label, thank you, we should name it. Because anything that's going to show up in our code, we really don't want these default names. So let's name it LBL for label, hello world. And then in my code, I can say I want to set LBL, hello world's visible property equal to true also. Let's run. Click me. Hello. And hello, here's your stuff. Okay, is everything working? Good, good, good so far. Using all sorts of controls here. So what do you think the difference is between a label and a text box? What do you think? Yes, sir?
Labels show text and text boxes are rendering them.
Yep. So you could almost think of a label as just like output or informational stuff. And a text box is your input control from your user. So let's create one, because we know we need to get input from users all the time. Of course, I'd like to, you know, maybe put like a drop shadow back behind my image or something, since it's just looking kind of plain, but we got to do other stuff. So let's do that other stuff. I want a text box. So let's put a text box on here. I'm going to put it right above my button. Now, the text box control is also something that you should find in your common controls. If you notice, that's pretty much what we've been using so far. So I'll grab a text box. We have text boxes and we have rich text boxes. We wouldn't really use a rich text box unless we were going to let people do some really advanced formatting. So we'll just use a regular text box. Now, for a regular text box, Windows is going to assume that it's one line of text. If I want it to be multiple lines, I can change a property, but by default, it's just going to be one. So as soon as we put this text box in here, notice that as you move it around, it's got some snap to lines that pop up that let you align it to that button underneath and the picture box beside, those blue lines. So you can use those to kind of format things well. Now, when you're working with a Windows form, though, there's some other formatting controls you can use. Let me get this thing to be full screen or full screenish. Now, right now, I only have one item selected. But if I select my picture box and my button, and I have multiple items selected, you'll see the special alignment toolbar show up. And it usually is already on your view menu as something that's available. So it should just show up once you have multiple controls selected. Now, you can use that with multiple controls to fix things. So we'll look at it again, but just so you know, like if I wanted to make all of these exactly the same size, I could. It would be kind of unreasonable. Notice that it made them all the same size based on the first one I had selected. That was my text box. So that's why they all came out that size. So I'll Control Z, because that was a bad move. So then I'll try another one. See, I could align all the rights. That would line everything up on the right-hand column. Control Z. I could align lefts. We can align centers. So that alignment toolbar just lets us go a lot further than those snap to grid lines to get everything lined up and looking nice. Okay, so our text box. I'm going to click somewhere to deselect everything and select the text box. Now our text box needs to be named properly. So let's name it TXT input. I don't think there's anything else we need to change on our text box control. We could change the text here, but Windows forms, we normally leave text boxes blank and allow users to type things in. Sometimes when you guys are using web development, you might type in like a placeholder or something instead. So we can see just a little bit of differences in the way things are handled. Let's run this thing and just look at how that text box looks. It's not going to be very pretty. We could change its back color or something so it would blend in a little bit more. If I click, I get my message, everything's good. So what I'm thinking is I want my text box to be a way for my user to change the message. So I'm going to put a label above it. And I'm going to change my label to say, type your message text below. And again, I'm going to up my font size because it's just not readable. And what I want to do is, if they type something in that message, I want our click me button to use whatever they typed for the message box instead of saying hello. But if they didn't type anything, we'll just use that same hello message that we've been using. So let's go to our code. And I want to set up a variable is a string variable to hold our message. And we'll start out with it saying hello. Now in our code, we can say if our text input .text, remember, because that's the property we use for text type things when we're working with our Windows forms, if that text property equals an empty text, then we want to leave it hello. So I think I want to make this be not equals. So if it's not empty, I want our message to equal whatever they typed in. And then in our message box.show, I can't just show that text hello. I need to use our message instead, our new variable. Let's run it and see how we're doing. Click me, hello, okay. A different message. And it shows up in our message box. So everybody's working okay?
My throat. All of hello popped up again after I entered the message and clicked it. And here's what I get. See, then it does.
Okay, so everything's looking good there. Let's add one more thing. I want to add a text box where we can display something. So I want to stop running. You probably already have. And I'm going to bring up my form design. And I want to put, let's see, I'm going to use a text box. And I'm going to put mine up here on the opposite side of my Hello World picture. And of course, as soon as I let go, it snapped that text box to just be one line. And I want it to be bigger. So I'm going to find that property. It's the multi-line property. And I'm going to change it from false to true. And then I can make my text box a little bigger. I want to name this. So I'm going to name it TXT time. Let's see if that'll work. And what I want to do is just put like a message in here that says, thank you for using the application, and then we'll time stamp it that they used it at this certain time, okay? So let's go back to our Click Me button code. Notice how, even though we have a lot of controls on our form, right now all of our code is contained in the event procedure that's associated with our button. Now, a common thing that can happen to people is if they're typing code that they're looking at from a book or from online, and they don't realize that the BTN hello event procedure has to be associated with that button, they can get all the code in, but it won't do anything. So we're going to make ours do that so you'll know how to fix it. But let's add this first. All right, so I've got my new text box. So I want to format some output for my new text box. So let's reuse our message variable. And in our message variable, I think I'm going to use that interpolated string thing here. And I want to say thank you for using the Hello app. And I want to go to a new line. And then I'm going to add more to our message. Current date and time is, and let's see if we can get that. So I know that that's something that we haven't looked at in much in any books. So I could Google C# current date. And of course, there's a bunch of places we could go. And it looks like it's pretty easy. We just have to use this datetime.now. That should be simple. I'm just going to stick that right inside my curly braces. It's a property, so it does not want the open and close parentheses. I thought it was method. That's all right. So now we're getting our current date and time. So I want to put that message into our new text box, our TXT input, and we want it to be our text property because that's the property that lets stuff display. So we'll use our message variable there. So I want to run this and see if we're getting anything. Oh, I got it in my message there. That's not what I wanted. Where'd it go? It's going everywhere. We should set up a new variable for it, huh? Let's set up a new string variable for it. We'll call it date message. And then I'll update. Shouldn't be causing us that trouble. There's probably something I'm not seeing.
It should be on the TXT time and not on the TXT input.
Ah, so it's just in the wrong place, huh? Should make a big difference. That looks much better. Doesn't seem like it's breaking though, where I want it to. Now part of that is because my text box isn't quite big enough, but part of it has to do with using a text box and that Newline Character. Now, the Newline Character came from the old typewriters. We always had to do the carriage return, push the paper over to the side, and then a new line to go down a line. So we need that carriage return. So we're going to do \T \N. Let's see if that'll give it to us. Give me a tab. \R, not T, sorry. All those letters. Carriage return, R. Okay, click U. Now after the app, it's got the new line. So notice that it's just a little bit, it needs both control codes to actually move to a new line when we're working in a text box with our Windows forms. Okay, so some things to look at here. In our application, we displayed lots of things with our controls. We've read in the data from a text box. We output information to a text box. We've output some information even to our message box. So a lot of things here that we've used. It doesn't seem like too many, but it is quite a few. So your first assignment for the week, I want to give you a chance to work on today because it is kind of fun to work with Windows Forms. So the survey form, and I do want you to have a good time with it. Now the survey form is an opportunity for you to experiment with a lot of different Windows controls, the ones that you would like to use, but there are some that I want you to have in here for sure. So you'll have to have a label in a text box, no big deal. Radio button and checkbox, you might mess with those a little bit. We can try some and see how they work. The month calendar and the numeric up-down, these are ones that you're going to have to do a little bit of Googling on, a little bit of research to figure out how they work. Now, what you want is this form is going to be kind of a survey. You're going to ask a user for their interests and find something, think of something that you like so that it's meaningful to you, so that it's not just boring and ugly. So if I were going to ask someone like what their favorite pizza was, I might have, you know, some labels about pizza. Of course, it doesn't say a picture box, but I would add one just because that seems duh. And then I'd have some check boxes, you know, do you like pepperoni, sausage, whatever, and all of those different things. The numeric up-down is the number box that gives you the up and down arrows that you guys use all the time on Windows. You've seen it. Now, the thing is that once you're done, your user is done filling out the survey form, when they click submit, I need you to gather information from all of these variables to output some sort of message to the user. It says to create a label that can be used to output this information. You saw I created a text box, so either one is fine. It's just kind of up to you. Those kinds of things, however you want to do it, is fine. Now, you also want to place a clear button on the form that resets everything back to their defaults. Let's do that real quick with ours before we break here. So if I look at our app, first of all, I want to show you how with our text box, I could go to the properties of our text box. And one property that's interesting is read only. Right now it's set to false, but if I set that to true, it would make this text box sort of more like a label, that it's not updatable. Now let's run and see how that changes the look of that text box. It doesn't change much, just as a user they can't type into it. So you have that option. Okay, so I want a clear button. Ours is a little bit different of an app, so I think I want a reset button under this big clear button, or click me button. So I'm going to grab a button control. I'm going to draw it. And I'm going to first change my name of my button, and I'll make it BTN reset. Now, if you notice, there's a weird bug here with the Windows form where it didn't set my background color properly. So I'll change it and change it back, and that seems to fix it. I changed my flat style on my other button, so I need to change it on this one so that it looks the same. And then I want to change the text property so that my button says reset. I think I'll make it a bigger font too. Again, it's hard to read, my fault. Now I want to add code to that button. So I can just double click it. Visual Studio will create the event procedure for me, and I can type my code in there. Now, we have to always be really careful that we're putting our code in the right place, because I could accidentally get into my button hello click event procedure. That wouldn't be right. Make sure you're in your button reset click event. So what kind of things have we changed? Let's see. First of all, I want to make sure that our text input text property is empty, because if it's not, we'll use that as a message. I want to change my button hello text back to its initial value. It said click me, because remember in our event procedure we're changing it to say thank you. And then I want to clear out our date message. Oops, TXT time. I just don't like that name, do I? Again, we'll set it to 2 double quotes to clear it out so that it's just empty. Now there's another thing we could do. Let me show you. I could say TXT time dot clear and use that method also. So either way would work fine. So if you want to add some comments, clear out text box with nothing. And then this one, use the clear method to clear out text box. Looks great. Now you see how when we're getting all these little pieces, even more pieces than you had before, be sure to call out to someone if something's whacking out, because you can really have a hard time with things and it might not be that big of a deal. Was there anything that I forgot? It seems like there might be some things I forgot. The visibility. That looks good, except for it. So for my visibility, I want to make sure that my picture box, that visible property, is set back to false, and my label. Now, if you notice when we start this application, the focus, the control that has the attention of the system right now is the click me button. That's fine. Just want you to notice it. So I'm going to click it. It says hello. I get all my other stuff. And now my focus is still on that button, which is fine, but maybe I would want it someplace else. I'm going to click reset and make sure that works. It works. So what I could do is at the end of our click me event, we could say that we want the button reset to receive focus. And that just means we want the cursor and all of the control to be focused on that button so that it's ready for the user to click. You know how those apps are that you use all the time where you type one thing and then it doesn't move automatically. You have to click someplace else and you're like, why can't it just move to the right spot and do it for me? We want to be developers where we move things to the right spot for them. So let's run this. Click me. I could type in my message. Now notice that the reset button is the one that's enabled or focused. Yes, sir?
Can you use the staple, like the thank you button?
Do what?
Are you able like the staple button so it can't be clicked anymore?
We could. Which one do you want to disable?
Just leveraging just the thank you, not be able to get it anymore. I'm just curious. If that's
Sure, we could. Let's do that. So in our click me event, right here when we set the focus on our reset button, let's take our hello button and change its enabled property to false. Now, enabled is kind of like visible, only with the enabled property, the control is still visible on the form, it's just not usable. So sometimes you can pick and choose which property you want to use depending on the need you have. Good, so you can see how that's disabled. It's not even available to be clicked on, but we can still see it. So try some of those things. That's just going to help you learn stuff. So. Now I'd like to have a message display when they close the form before we do lab stuff. Let's look at our form design. And in the properties window, remember we've been so far just looking at our properties. And I said, well, we'll look at that lightning bolt here in a second. Well, now it's time. Click on that lightning bolt in your toolbar, and that's going to take you to looking at events for the button reset. Well, I don't want events for the reset button. I want to do something if somebody tries to close the form. So I'm going to click my drop down here and change my focus from the reset button to form 1. Now I could have reached over and just clicked on form 1, but I can always change that focus in that drop down list there of all the controls that I'm looking at. So now I'm looking at form 1 and I see all of the controls or events, sorry, for form 1. So let's find one that has to do with somebody trying to close this form. There's form closed and there's form closing. I want to create an event procedure that runs when somebody tries to close the form. So I'm going to click on that to select it. Now I have some options. If I had already coded an event procedure myself and I wanted to attach it to this event when somebody tries to close the form, I could use that drop-down list and choose that event procedure. I haven't created one. Yes, sir?
I assume the form closed and form closing.
Make sure that this list up here, you're looking at your form.
Right.
That's why the form's a good one for us to do that too, because it has those ones that you can't get to anyplace else. Okay, now in our form closing event, since I want it to create it for me, I'm just going to double click in that blank spot in Visual Studio is going to create that event procedure for me and associate it with that form closing event. Now, I want to say something in a message box. I'll just give them another thank you. But I want you to see how you can attach things to these different events. So I'm going to click Start. Now if I try to close the application, I should see that pop up. Now the other thing that the assignment says that you need to do is I don't think there's anything else. I think you're good. There are definitely some controls that you're going to have to do a little research on, but that should be fun for you to research. Now, do not feel like you're limited to these. Anything that you want to try, go for it, because it's an opportunity for you to experiment. So what I would recommend, get this basic stuff done and make sure that your submit button gathers all the information and puts it in a text box or a label or wherever you want it, and then start enhancing. So if you want to make it better, you can. Now we could add a picture to the background of the form, you know, to buttons, all sorts of things. So experiment with it. See what it'll do for you. That just gives you like 20 minutes to play with it. So see what you can do. Yes, sir? Sure. Is this what you need, code?